To our top story, and Vladimir Putin has announced a temporary ceasefire to pause fighting in Ukraine to coincide with the anniversary of VE Day. It comes after President Trump criticized the Russian leader, saying he was disappointed with Putin and called on him to reach a deal. The US president spoke after private talks with Ukraine's President Zelensky during the funeral of Pope Francis in Rome at the weekend, something he referenced before boarding Air Force One. Take a look.
I think the meeting went well. We'll see what happens over the next few days. We'll probably learn a lot. I was very disappointed that missiles were flying by Russia. But that missiles were flying. Very disappointing. We'll see how it goes. Well, I want them to stop shooting, sit down and sign a deal. And we have the confines of a deal, I believe. And I want them to sign it and be done with it and just go back to life.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Al Arabiya editor Wissam Kirouz and media strategist and former editor-in-chief Michael Jabri-Pickett. So, Michael, there we are. We're still talking about Ukraine and Russia. We've had a little bit of movement. What do you think Putin's motives are for this ceasefire that he's announced?
He needs to make sure that he still has Donald Trump in his corner, or that he can control him or manipulate him. I think Vladimir Putin understands how important it is that he has Donald Trump willing to continue to engage. Now, remember, if we go back several months on the campaign trail, Donald Trump had said, first day in office, this war, he'll be able to sort it out. He'll be able to make a deal. That hasn't happened. And I think that Vladimir Putin recognizes he needs to keep Donald Trump engaged, and he can push the envelope a little bit, but he can't get to the point where Marco Rubio had said just yesterday, you know, we're thinking about maybe reevaluating and maybe moving on to other issues.
So, Wissam, I actually saw ceasefires have been attempted more than 20 times. That's a lot of ceasefires, and they've all basically fallen apart at the seams. What's your thought pattern on Donald Trump? Similar to what Michael thinks?
I think Donald Trump has given a lot previously to Putin, to Russia, and the Russians are somewhere in the margin between the necessity of keeping on giving Trump the signal that they are willing to engage and to go for the deal, and between the fact that they are in a good position and they can win more and more on the ground. Because let's not forget that in the big picture, they have a deal on the table that says that ceasefire on the current lines of conflict, that Ukraine will never be in NATO, that Crimea will be Russian, and the sanctions will be lifted. It's a perfect scenario for the Russians if they can get some more land. Now, at the same time, having them to declare a ceasefire or attempted ceasefire for the 20th time on the 7th of October, it's also a signal from the Russians that they are willing to give this dynamic a chance.
We also saw that historic picture taken at the Vatican in Rome of Zelensky and Donald Trump meeting. And I don't know if both of you have an opinion on this, but do you think maybe Trump's approach towards Ukraine appears to have changed slightly? Do you think it was that moment that is signifying a change in the rhetoric?
So I think that something has changed, and I'm not sure if the parties behind the scene have recognized that we need to make this work. And so President Zelensky was able to bend the knee, for popular parlance. He went maybe in a much more respectful way, at least in President Trump's mind. And maybe Donald Trump was also more willing to engage because, if you recall, during the Oval Office exchange, there were other people there, and there might have been that old reality TV star Donald Trump where he was thinking he was performing in front of an audience. But when the two men came together, certainly that photograph, which I think you and I have spoken about it, you know, will become very famous by the end of this year when we're looking back on key moments. that photograph seemed to have two men who were trying to find, because we know the story, common ground. And I believe it was telling that there was intent on both sides to try and at least have a meeting of the minds, and maybe to have a conversation that's more productive rather than something that's performative.
Yes, and in our business, the news business, we have developed this ability to see a picture and know that this will be a cliche. It's going to be a picture for the future, for history. And from the very first moment, as we saw the problem between Trump and Zelensky in the Oval Office, when we saw this amazing picture, we can see the strength of it. And just to talk about the appearance, it is universal. You have a Jewish president talking with a Protestant president about an Orthodox conflict and the funerals of a Catholic pope. And then you have this image of what looks like a confessional, someone confessing to another. Was it Trump confessing to Zelensky for what he did for him? Or was it the other side? But I would say that there was a moment of truth for Zelensky. This has to stop. He has to make concessions, maybe not confessions. And maybe it was an occasion for Trump to remind Zelensky of what late Pope Francis told the Ukrainians 1 year ago, and they weren't very happy about it, when he told them, you have to have the courage of the white flag. It was a very strong statement, and it's basically where we got to now, the courage of the white flag.
Well, actually, earlier I spoke to a former US diplomat and lecturer on Russian foreign policy at Johns Hopkins University, Donald Jensen. He told me what he thought about the reasons behind Trump's change towards Ukraine. Take a listen.
Well, I think President Trump is finding out that this is far more difficult than solving in a few days. I think the president is now more uncertain than he has been about Putin's good faith, something that he and envoy Witkoff talked about many times earlier. Putin has no interest in a peace deal on anything other than Russian terms, and many people have criticized the so-called U.S. plan for being leaning too far to Russia. The Europeans are strongly against, and I was pleased to see a good atmosphere in the talk between Zelensky and Trump in the Vatican, but there is almost no chance Zelensky will accept a turnover of Crimea to Russia. And that means essentially that the Trump plan is seriously wounded.
There we go. So basically he was saying Crimea is the main issue. I don't know if that's something you agree with or something we think that we can actually get past, because this is what's been holding up any kind of ceasefire staying in place.
So according to the Ukrainian constitution, the Crimea is not on the table. And according to everything that President Zelensky has said, Crimea is part of Ukraine. But President Trump seems to be saying something very different, almost as though he's speaking out of turn. He's saying something that maybe is part of the negotiating process, but it feels as though what he says, Vladimir Putin now has the inside track because he has all the information. It's as though Vladimir Putin sees the cards that the Ukrainians and the Americans are holding. And to my mind, I believe that Crimea has to 100% be part of the negotiations if this is going to be sorted. For heaven's sakes, Russia's been there since 2014. They're not about to all of a sudden walk away from everything.
Yeah. I would say, I will have to differentiate myself a little bit with you. I would say somehow in the back mind of everyone on the table, there is an impossibility of Crimea to become Ukrainian again. Even though it's not only a constitutional problem for Ukraine, it's a problem for America itself, because there is a law that has been passed by the Congress and advocated for by Marco Rubio himself that makes it impossible for an American president to recognize Crimea as non-Ukrainian unless it is accepted by the Congress. But now, at the same time, we have to acknowledge that as Russia has an upper hand on the conflict, the importance of Crimea and the psychology of Russia is humongous. For them, Crimea has been annexed to Ukraine in 1957 by a Soviet president, if I'm not mistaken, it's Khrushchev, and it was an internal Sovietic maneuver. then for them, in their psychology, it is the birthplace of the Russian nation, because Vladimir, the founder of Russia, or what is known as the Kievan Russia, was baptized in Sebastopol, which is now Crimea. And also it symbolizes for them their victory over the Ottoman Empire. So this narrative has been used a lot in Russia for the last 10 years. And when Trump comes to say that Zelensky has accepted, I wouldn't say it comes from nowhere. There is a certain, of course, there are going to be some adjustments, some phrasings, but having Crimea be Ukrainian again is, in political science, almost, very difficult. I wouldn't say impossible, but very difficult.
For European leaders, it has to be very concerning for them, because if you look back in history, Italy invades in 1935 what is today present-day Ethiopia. And the League of Nations, Britain and France don't do that much. That then emboldens Hitler a couple of years later to go into the Rhineland, which according to the Treaty of Versailles, he was not allowed to do.
Yes.
He does that, again, nobody does anything. And so the Europeans
Then
know...
he goes to Czech Republic. I don't know.
Yes. So it continues.
Yeah.
And so the Europeans know this very well because this is their backyard. And they're concerned about the negotiations because they don't want to be down this road where Vladimir Putin can take something and then take a little bit more and then get whatever he wants. And it sends a bad precedent, especially if the United States are threatening to walk away, threatening to abdicate what it has become their role since the end of the Second World War. And I think it scares everybody throughout the world that the aggressor can get whatever it is that they're after.
Add to that, I don't want to talk more about it, add to that the most prominent Western nation is advocating annexing Greenland and having Canada at the 51st state. It's a lot of confusion in the world. But in the same time, this parallel between Nazi Germany and Russia, and today's Russia, seems very predominant in the European press. But is it really what is real in politics today from the perspective of Russia or China or America or the new big players? I don't think so. Crimea and Ukraine and Russia are very connected in their history, in their people. Of course, there is a big problem now, and there is an aggression, and everyone knows who is the aggressor. But it's too complicated to take it back to the situation.
But Crimea is one thing, but the Russian forces have also gone into about 20% of Ukraine. And I can't imagine that they're going to keep Crimea and give up on the 20%. And so it goes back to my argument, which is that the Europeans recognize that somebody who is an aggressor can't simply go and take what they want and there are no repercussions.
Yes, of course.
Well, Donald Trump definitely has had the ball rolling when it comes to these talks, and we have seen that. So I think we'll be discussing this a little bit more throughout the time when you spend time with me on the show.
You have 4 years minus 100 days.
Yes. To our top story, today marks 100 days since Donald Trump was sworn in as President of the United States for a second time. The 100-day milestone has always been viewed as symbolic and a time to reflect on a president's progress. Over the last 3 months, Trump has continued to be a divisive leader. Critics argue he's overstepping his powers and damaging international relationships. But supporters insist he's delivering on his election promises by taking action. Here's a look back at some of his first 100 days at the White House.
Be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having
I'm not
cards.
playing cards.
Right now, you don't.
You're
playing cards.
Mr. President.
You're playing cards.
Serious.
You're gambling with the lives of
war.
millions of people. You're
Yeah.
gambling with World War III. I think that we will make a deal with China. I think we've had some very good talks, but we will have some very good talks remaining. And, I view it, and some people say, oh, rush. I think we have a lot of time. Let's be honest. The European Union was formed in order to screw the United States. That's the purpose of it. and they've done a good job of it, but now I'm president. We need Greenland for national security and even international security, and I think we're going to get it. One way or the other, we're going to get it. Canada only works as a state, keeping "O Canada," the national anthem. I love it. I think it's great. Keep it. But it'll be for the state, one of our greatest states, maybe our greatest state.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I am joined by Dubai 92 presenter John O'Hayes and correspondent and columnist Gemma White. Great to have you both on the show on What a Day, Trump 100 days in office. So, Jono, it's been memorable. We just had a look at that montage there. A lot has happened, but which moment stands out for you the most?
I think it's been memorable, but it's also been memeable. I think it's the most memeable presidency in first 100 days that we've seen in living history. There's certainly been a lot of sound bites just from the clips that we've just seen that really stand out from the Trump administration so far. I think probably the moment he had the conference where he said, "I'm back and I'm better than ever," was probably a classic Trump moment that we witnessed. Big J.D. Vance and Zelensky and Trump in the Oval Office in somewhat of a UFC moment where that came to blows as well was one of the other moments. But honestly, for me, it's how quickly he rolled back on the environmental regulations. It signalled a very sharp change from what we'd seen with the last administration, and the priorities in his first few days, including one that I have to admit, it's probably one of my favourite policies that's been revoked, was the change in plastic straws. And so Trump had said that paper straws are gone, we're no longer going to do that anymore, and instead we're going to go back to paper straws. That for me was one of the most standout, mainly because it was almost unbelievable to watch him sign that and see that that was his most impressive first couple of days and weeks in the administration.
And do you know what? We've actually got a clip of that, so I want everyone to just take a moment and watch this clip.
Going back to plastic straws, these things don't work. I've had them many times, and on occasion they break, they explode. If something's hot, they don't last very long, like a matter of minutes, sometimes a matter of seconds. It's a ridiculous situation. And I don't think that plastic's going to affect a shark very much as they're munching their way through the ocean. Okay.
So, Gemma, I would agree that sometimes paper straws can be a little bit annoying. I'm not sure if they can explode. But for you, what has been the stand-up moments in Trump's first 100 days so far?
I think for me, obviously, there's threatening to take Greenland by force, which was kind of came out of nowhere, I think. And along with annexing Canada, you know, there was a lot of empire building kind of rhetoric around that. But for me, it was the firing of over 120,000 federal workers. For your first 100 days, you know, decimating the workforce and increasing unemployment just seemed like a really foolhardy way to begin. Also, the dismantling of the Department of Education. Now, obviously, each state sets their own curriculum, so the Department of Education doesn't oversee the curriculum, but they do oversee things like grants for low-income families, people, students with disabilities, and so there'll be so much anxiety for those families hearing that the department's going to be dismantled, and they're going to be wondering, well, how are we going to get our Pell Grants? Where are we going to get the special dispensations for our children from? So a lot of anxiety created in 100 days.
Absolutely, and we've seen a lot of pressure in the way of protests being put on Donald Trump. That's one of the things that people have been talking out about. So in the next 100 days, moving the conversation on slightly, what do you think that we would like to see from Donald Trump? You know, obviously, this has been a bombastic 100 days. He's come out with all guns blazing, doing everything he said he would on the campaign trail. But would you like things to become a little bit more relaxed moving forward, maybe?
Well, I think we've seen a lot of executive orders, and we now know that he's signed in 142 executive orders in 100 days. That compares to Joe Biden in 4 years, 162 executive orders. So it has been the administration of exec orders that have been signed into place. Of course, signing them into place doesn't mean that they come into effect immediately, so we'll now see the trickle down in the next 100 days of those becoming the real, the realism of those will set into place. So I imagine that we will see all of those come to the fore as well. And there is the one matter that's outstanding, which he did say he would tackle, the Ukraine-Russia conflict. He would have that done within his first 100 days. We are now 100 days in, and although we are on the verge of a ceasefire, it is a short-lived one, and that has not been achieved yet. So I imagine in the next 100 days, the shift in politics will go somewhat towards that. I would like to see that been addressed slightly more, but certainly more executive orders on the way, I'm sure, as well, and hopefully more that are akin to the one from plastic straws, which is the only one that I've seen so far that I thought, yes, I'm going to get behind this one.
How about you, Gemma? What would you like to see from Trump going forward?
I'd like to see more calmness, more stability. I would like to see less anxiety. There's a very famous saying, which is, when America sneezes, Britain catches a cold. And I think we don't just apply that to Britain anymore, we apply it to the world. So I would like fewer metaphorical sneezes from the US. I think more nose to the grindstone. As you said, there's been all these executive orders, and now it's time to sort of put your money where your mouth is, which Trump loves doing. You know, it's the art of the deal. It's here's the words, now I'm going to do the deal. So I would thought he would relish the chance then to back up all of his orders with, well, here's the evidence, here's the receipts, you know, this is what I've done.
And I think that today, maybe in the White House, we saw Caroline Leavitt come out and she was saying it's been 100 days. It's been absolutely historic. Trump's done everything he said he would do. They were very resolute on the tariffs, saying that loads of countries are ringing them. They're going to get deals. So I think from the White House, their point of view right now is that they are definitely on the right path. And earlier, I actually spoke to the former Trump state campaign chair, Rob Artlett, who addressed concerns that people have had towards President Donald Trump. Take a listen.
Well, I would say they're fabricated, and I don't think that they're real. What I mean by that is, again, President Trump is doing exactly what he said he would do when he ran for president this second time. So what he's doing is he's placing focus on America and making America first. And what does that mean? Well, you first start off by securing our border. You getting rid of the illegal criminals that are in this country, and that's what he's doing. He's deporting tens of thousands of them with a lot more to go. So he's safeguarding that. He's creating an equal playing field when it comes to our economy, meaning the tariffs. He's putting a focus back on American manufacturers and also back on the American consumer. So to me, he is doing exactly what he said he was going to do. And I think people should be concerned, well, because there is a new sheriff in town, there is a new president, whereas his focus is America first and not everybody else. And I think that is a welcome conversation and a welcome shift, if you would, here in America. And the American people voted for that. And I believe the majority of the American people are loving the fact that he's actually been doing just that. And I'll also add removing of the fraud and the waste within our federal government. We all knew it existed, but I think very few people believed it was to this level. So again, President Trump is delivering on that message and on that promise to getting rid of the waste and the fraud and the abuse within our federal government.
There we go. So that was Rob speaking to me earlier. And as I said to you, you know, he's completely behind the president with everything that he's doing. Trump also, interestingly, gave an interview to The Atlantic, which was something that obviously caused chaos when the Signal Gate came out. But he said, the first time I had two things to do, run the country and survive. I had all these crooked guys. And he said, the second time I run the country and the world. Jono, do you think that's how Donald Trump sees himself right now?
It's a bold statement, but we are seeing how big an impact the US has. And I've said this before, the US, when it speaks, the entire world listens, and very much that is the case in this administration as well. What I will say is that although he's sticking to what he said, there's a few loose ends that need to be tied up that I would like him to see him tie up in the next couple of weeks. He's still been viewed very favourably. He is a businessman. He has tightened the belt of the company that is the United States of America. So when we see this massive layoff of many, many staff and many cost-cutting measures that have been put into place, and certainly, as you mentioned, with the education as well, he is viewing the entire country as a business, which is what he's been elected to do. Run it exactly how he sees fit. And it seems that in the next 100 days, we're going to have more of that. I wouldn't be surprised if more cuts are on the horizon. We've heard rumours and echoes through the Trump administration and externally. So I would imagine that the next 100 days we'll see further cost-cutting measures so that that belt can be as tight as possible, so that Trump can have as much free cash to play around with, so he can run the administration how he sees fit.
Would you agree with that?
I mean, Time magazine called it among the most destabilising in American history when talking about the first 100 days. So, yeah, for the next 100 days, as you say, it could really... I'm hoping for calm and stability. I don't believe that's going to happen. I think it's going to get more and more. I think they're going to go faster and faster, bigger statements. I don't think the rhetoric on Greenland is going to come down. I think the rhetoric around Canada, you know, that's kind of played out now. And lots of... Now we have Trump 2028 as well, which is a new, air quotes, joke that apparently he made. But a lot of his supporters have really clung on to that. They're getting hats made. They're feeling very strongly that he could go for a third term, which is obviously against the Constitution. So I'm wondering if we're going to see any more of that, joke or otherwise.
Well, there is a way around it, and he has figured out the way to do this already. And cleverly or not, he's discovered that if J.D. Vance runs and gets elected and takes to the White House, and then J.D. Vance steps down, whereas Donald Trump has been serving as VP for the time, he can take the position of president once again. And that may be the workaround that he'll see in 2028. But that is a time-will-tell situation.
It's like season 4 of Succession.
Absolutely. I think we've all subscribed on, even if we want to or not. We've got the subscription. We have to watch the series out to the very end.
No, absolutely fascinating. And Donald Trump spent, I think it was 24 days on the golf course. So he spent just a quarter of his time right now playing golf. Good for him. You should always stick with your hobbies. But let's move on to another story now. And we have just discussed Canada, actually, and Gemma, in what's been described as a historic turnaround, Mark Carney's Liberal Party has won the election. That's despite his party looking like it was heading for collapse just months ago. But the former banker fell short of the majority government he wanted to help him negotiate tariffs with US President Donald Trump. In his victory speech, he said the next few months would be challenging and require sacrifices. Let's take a listen.
Who's ready to stand up for Canada with me? Our old relationship with the United States, a relationship based on steadily increasing integration, is over. The system of open global trade, anchored by the United States, a system that Canada has relied on since the Second World War, a system that, while not perfect, has helped deliver prosperity for a country for decades, is over. These are tragedies, but it's also our new reality.
So there we are. Gemma, I can't believe that it's Mark Carney. I don't think a lot of the world can. Who would have thought this? When Justin Trudeau stood down, it looked like pretty much the party had been completely decimated. Yeah. But Carney's just turned around a sinking ship, really.
I mean, to the layperson, he has come out of nowhere. But obviously the people in finance, they know that he's been governor of Bank of Canada, governor of the Bank of England, seeing them through Brexit. I think what people like about him is he is a political outsider. And obviously Trudeau was part of a political dynasty. And so there is this freshness and newness about him. I think what's very interesting, as you said, the Liberals were going to lose the election. Poilievre and the Conservatives were on track to win. Poilievre put all his eggs in he was called Donald Trump light, and he very much leaned into that. When Donald Trump started talking about making Canada the 51st state, sentiment in the country absolutely turned on a sixpence. And so Poilievre found himself with the wrong message, and Carney stepped in, looking like the strong man of Canada. We're going to stand up to our neighbours. And I think that was a massive factor for voters. Yeah, absolutely. John, I don't know what your thoughts are.
So with Poilievre, he obviously was a front runner on this. Everyone was convinced. But the rhetoric of him being similar enough, or his policies aligning too closely to Donald Trump for Canadians, who are the nicest people in the world, was far too risky for the Canadian public to take on board. So the shift in sentiment was very dramatic, and it seems nobody expected this to happen. And Mark Carney will now take the reins, and it seems that your background in politics is no longer required in order to be able to have a career in politics.
Well, I guess we can see that with Donald Trump, can't we? Obviously, we were talking about that earlier, businessman, and now he's running the USA, and of course, Mark Carney. I feel like a lot of people maybe also thought that he was a reliable hand because he's been in the public eye for so long, Mark Carney. But earlier, I actually spoke to a Toronto-based journalist, Sam Jabri-Pickett, who told me Mark Carney will actually meet with President Trump in the not-so-distant future.
I think it would be against everything Mark Carney has showed himself to be if he were not to meet with President Trump. But here's the thing, 78%, almost 80% of Canada's trade goes to the U.S. The only reason there was a trade deficit was because we sell them a lot of energy. I think it would be really outside of what Canadians are expecting if he doesn't meet with Trump. You know, he ran one of the most anti-American campaigns in Canada's history. But we all want a good deal. You know, we all have friends and family that live in the U.S. Canada and the U.S. are and remain extremely economically integrated. And Mark Carney's idea of a good deal is really going to sort of push him over the line for a lot of Canadians. And advocating for Canada, Canadian businesses, the rights of Canadians, Canadian sovereignty are all going to be big things. And all those things need a deal. Mark Carney's going to be leading the G7 later this year. And when those meetings happen with other major world economies, which Mark Carney is familiar with, I think, of course, he's going to be able to meet with Donald Trump.
I thought that was quite interesting how he spoke about Canada and America being so interlinked. And I feel like the rhetoric of late has made Canada almost more national, stand together.
We rarely hear about Canadians in general kicking up a fuss about things. So it's nice to see them be passionate about something and something that is political. However, it is bad news for Pierre, because unfortunately now he's lost not just this race, but he's also lost his seat, a seat which he's held since 2004. And that is now something that's also gone. So although he will be allowed to be involved somewhat in politics, he will not be on the benches. He will be from the sideline, and he will not really have a voice anymore in politics. So this is a defeat on a magnitude unlike one that we've seen in Canadian politics. And again, the world's eyes rarely turn to Canadian politics until there's a situation whereby they may be the 51st state. And so I believe for Poilievre, this is going to be a disaster, politically speaking, for him. And this takes a complete turn and takes him out of the game completely. So he may have to stand down entirely from the world of politics, or may just look on from the sideline. Unfortunately for him, this has not been a very good outcome. And obviously Mark Carney's promises of housing shortage to tackle that, a cut to tax for the lower tax bracket as well, and also to raise the defence spending for Canada, which has up until now not really been such a massive concern. That has all resonated with the Canadian people and led to a huge success for Mark Carney, who will now work to make up a government with the minority which he has as part of Labour.
I must admit, I watched Pierre Poilievre's speech today when he obviously said that he had lost the election. And I did think it was actually gracious. He said, you know, we'll stand and hold the government to account. And I actually thought, fair enough, you know, you've come out and you've held your head up high, looking for the shining light. But Gemma, do you think that Carney is the man to negotiate with Trump? I think this is what everyone is asking, because obviously Trump is such a strong man. He likes to see a strong leader. Do you think maybe we've got that in Carney now?
What I'm going to find very interesting is Trump has a lot of bluster and blarney when he talks. He makes big declarations. And when you've got someone like Carney who's very calm, and he actually knows money, he knows financial institutions, he knows business. I'm wondering, a lot of Trump's businesses haven't done very well. You know, we see him, or he likes to show himself as this big businessman, but his history of business, you know, there's a lot of failures in there. So I'm very interested in what happens when someone who likes to make big dramatic statements comes up against someone who is very calm and thoughtful and considered. And I can't see Carney getting dragged into all these, you know, big declarations and conversations. I see him holding back and definitely being the calmer of the two when it comes to their meetings and conversations.
Now, the trial of a woman accused of murdering 3 of her relatives has begun in Australia. Erin Patterson allegedly served them a meal containing poisonous mushrooms. And while she admits to picking wild fungi, lying to the police and disposing of evidence, she says the tragedy was a terrible accident. Michael, let's start with you. This has absolutely gripped Australia, this story, and it's all around a beef Wellington. It sounds like something out of a film. Can you tell us more?
It does sound like something out of a film. And for me, the first thought was this will be a future CSI episode, if it hasn't already been one. I think every generation or so, there's a court case. We've had them in Canada. And I'm sure that they've happened in many countries around the world, that just grips the nation. And this is one of them. It has, I think, your average Australian family and a meal that's quite popular with in-laws. And there's so much drama that's been involved in it. The in-laws and an aunt show up. The ex-husband doesn't show up. He's the one that, it turns out, is fine. And then the one woman who doesn't get deathly ill is the one that's now accused of having killed 3 of them. It has the ingredients, pardon the pun, for a spectacular court case. And that's what we're seeing.
Oh, absolutely. Jono, you know, she's pleaded not guilty. What's her defence? And also, she was caught picking these death cap mushrooms, they're called?
Yeah, so there's many facets to this story, and like Michael said, there's already podcasts. There's already several podcasts that are out about this. We are, I'd say, months away from a Netflix special about this as well. It's gripped the nation. It's effectively a Typhoid Mary type story. I mean, to draw a parallel to that, it kind of seems a bit like everyone's thought about killing their in-laws. This lady's gone out there and done it, but in the most unusual and bizarre way. Of course, we've heard, as Michael said, there's the concept that she had a different coloured plate compared to the rest of her family, which is how she avoided having the same food as them. But she had denied, despite the fact that they've discovered the forage mushrooms, which she went out and got, which I believe, and you'd said this earlier, Michael, they tracked her phone in order to discover that she'd gone to that forest.
Schoolboy error, though, if you're gonna, you know what I mean?
I think we've watched enough true crime drama to know. I don't know if she had.
We all know how to do it.
Yeah.
But we don't act upon it. She dehydrated the mushrooms, then she added that as an ingredient in. I mean, first of all, you need to be a good level of botany knowledge to be able to go out there, know which mushrooms are going to be the ones that are poisonous versus the ones that you can put into your salad. And she's gone out there and intentionally done this. She then disposed of the dehydrator which she used, which has since been discovered with her fingerprints on there as well. That, coupled with the phone evidence that's there as well, coupled with the fact that she's the only person who didn't get sick and had used a separate plate, makes for a pretty damning case. But we're at jury selection at the moment, which means that we've got a solid maybe 6 weeks, maybe more on this one. We've seen cases like this go on a lot longer, which I think could make for some very interesting TV afterwards once we get a full documentary about it.
Absolutely. But also, she did say that she had cancer, and that's why she wanted the family to go around and to have this meal so she could discuss the diagnosis and how to break it to her children. So, as you did say, there's just so many different facets to the story.
I think it's incredibly interesting because what will there be a motive? And I think we've already heard from her lawyer or the prosecution, I'm not sure which one. One of them came out and they said there might not be a motive here. And I think when it gets to that point where that's usually one of the instances where people say, this is the reason why so-and-so did something, is because we have the motive. And when there is no motive or there's talk of no motive, I think it's going to make for an incredibly interesting and dramatic case.
You have to wonder where was as you said, where was the motive behind this? Where was the logic behind this? Because it is one of those gripping, fascinating crimes as well. The fake cancer diagnosis is, and although it's a shocking element to this, it's one of the least weird elements of this entire case.
Yeah.
So we're going to see this play out now, and with jury selection will be a difficult one because this story has been so heavily publicised that it's going to be almost impossible, I think, to find people who haven't heard about this story or haven't already formed an opinion about it as well. So it's going to play out in the next couple of weeks, and certainly looks like one that we're going to be hearing a lot about in the next weeks, or if not months.
And then I think you could almost take a pool. How many people out of the jury, as well as the prosecution and defense, will end up writing a book?
100%.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I know that's going to be, and it's going to be 12 people that they've got to select, and it's going to be difficult, like you said, because, you know, I'm sure there's been, as we know, there's podcasts around this. There's going to have been loads of conspiracy online in the papers, so people are going to have formed an opinion in many points.
And the motive will be the difference between this being manslaughter and this being murder, because without motive, this may potentially just be a manslaughter case, and with motive, this turns into be a murder case. So we're in a different realm, and this lady's going down for a lot different times, depending on what the outcome of this is.
Yeah, absolutely. What I found quite fascinating is I remember when this story first happened and they interviewed her straight after and she was absolutely distraught. So basically her defence are saying that, you know, she reacted the way she did because she panicked. She didn't realise she was going to, you know, people were going to die. It was going to be a triple murder case almost. So I don't know if there's any sympathy there for her.
I think it's difficult to have sympathy because somebody who had that level of knowledge for foraging in the first place went with intent, you would imagine. She didn't go out there to make sure that, because otherwise she would have consumed the exact same meal. And again, I'm speculating on this one, but you would imagine that there is, unless she was in some way not partial to the mushrooms herself, I can't find any reasoning behind this. And time will tell once we see the court cases. Unfortunately, no cameras allowed inside the court case for this one, so we won't know what's happening inside, and we're just getting loosely diagrammed drawings. So we'll have to wait for the Netflix special, I think, on this one.
Yeah, I'll definitely be tuning into that straight away. I think COVID made me obsessed with true crime along with the rest of the world.
I feel like I could get away with a lot of things.
Yes.
Given the amount of true crime I've watched at this stage. I could not make the rookie mistakes.
And that also, the phone was a schoolboy mistake. But anyway, we'll be back with you in just a moment. Vietnam's communist leader, General Secretary To Lam, says his country is ready to stand shoulder to shoulder with the world's great powers. The Southeast Asian nation is marking 50 years since the end of its war with the US. Thousands took to the streets to celebrate, but also to reflect on a conflict that killed millions of people. Patrick Falk reports.
Loud cheers accompanied by flag waving and patriotic songs to mark half a century since the end of the Vietnam War. Since the fall of Saigon, this country has transformed itself from a poverty-stricken backwater to a fast-growing and enterprising economy.
The atmosphere here today made not only me, but all the Vietnamese feel proud because we get to live in a peaceful country that is independent, free, and happy.
The celebrations commemorate the first act of the country's reunification on April 30th, 1975, when the communist-controlled North Vietnam seized the capital of the US-backed South, now renamed Ho Chi Minh in honor of the North's founding father. At the showpiece military parade in the city, Chinese troops marched alongside Vietnamese forces, underlining warming relations between the communist country and Beijing.
In a world of increasingly complex and unpredictable developments, and as a nation having suffered so much losses and pain from past wars, we are deeply aware of the value of peace, independence and freedom.
The 20-year conflict is estimated to have killed around 3 million Vietnamese and around 60,000 Americans. Since then, the country has developed strong economic and diplomatic ties with its former foe. Relations were normalized in 1995. Trade between the two has more than tripled in the past decade to about $150 billion in 2024. The memories of war now behind them both.
The Vietnamese people and the American people will always be friends.
Fears are, though, that their bonds could now be tested by the threat of crippling tariffs announced by US President Donald Trump earlier this month. Negotiations are underway between Hanoi and Washington, but pressure on Vietnam's export-led growth could reopen old wounds. Patrick Falk, Al Arabiya News.
Now to our top story, and President Trump has confirmed the US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz will be replaced. He is the first member of Trump's senior leadership team to leave in the president's second term. Taking to Truth Social, President Trump announced a new role for Waltz. He said, "I'm pleased to announce that I will be nominating Mike Waltz to be the next United States ambassador to the United Nations. From his time in uniform, on the battlefield, in Congress, and as my national security advisor, Mike Waltz has worked hard to put our nation's interests first. I know he will do the same in his new role. In the interim, Secretary of State Marco Rubio will serve as national security advisor while continuing his strong leadership at the State Department. Together, we will continue to fight fiercely to make America and the world safe again." Thank you for your attention to this matter. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by correspondent and columnist Gemma White and political scientist Dr. Eli Al-Hindi. Thank you so much for both joining me. Yes. So we've had an update from Donald Trump. He's obviously taken to Truth Social. Mike Waltz, Ellie, did take responsibility for Signalgate, something that happened a month ago now. But at the time, President Trump did defend his security advisor. How significant is this move now that Mike Waltz has left the position?
I think it's a very significant move, and as you mentioned, it's the first big person in the administration to actually leave, knowing that Trump in his first administration went through 4 different national security advisors. But then again, why wait for a month? What happened during that month? Why did it go the way it went? I think simply we can say that the pressure has went too much on this specific issue, or this specific mistake, if we might call it, and then somebody had to pay the price, and it was chosen to be Waltz. And in that sense, it was not presented as he is punished, but it was presented as he is moving into another senior position, which is the UN embassy the US embassy in the UN, which is also a very key position, very important to international policy and to the foreign policy of the USA in general.
And we know that Mike Waltz has been in the political atmosphere in the United States for a long time. But Gemma, many people out there are going to be asking about the Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, and how he is going to keep his job now.
Yeah, because of his involvement in Signalgate also. I think you can't underestimate how popular he is with the MAGA fan base. They absolutely love him. They see him as a dyed-in-the-wool Republican. He's got, there's a lot of support behind him. And even this week, Trump has been joking at a cabinet meeting. Trump patted him on the back and called him the least controversial person at the table. He is also singing his praises recently as well in the Rose Garden. And that is at odds with a lot of the sources that are coming out of the Pentagon. Words like erratic, referring to Hegseth's behaviour. We've also seen full-blown meltdown under his leadership. These are all quotes that are coming out. And obviously, Trump has said this is, disgruntled former employees. But you can't deny that there is no smoke without fire when it comes to, what people are saying in the Pentagon.
What are your thoughts?
I think it's been very critical to see how Hegseth has behaved in the Pentagon. And we've seen the former spokesperson, who was his friend initially, come up and say, the Pentagon is in chaos and I couldn't take it anymore, so I'm getting out. And for a friend to say that, it means the situation is very serious indeed. And Waltz also comparing, for example, military background. Waltz is a much stronger background with being a Green Beret, receiving medals, fighting so many battles, while criticism for Saget that he was in one tour, I think it was, and then came back to be a TV presenter in that sense. One thing also to keep in mind is that it is much easier to replace a national security advisor rather than a defense minister, because you don't need the Congress confirmation. So it simply could be a decision by Trump to do that and maybe offer a scapegoat for the media and move on from that as quickly as possible.
possibly the easiest option. Do you think it's interesting that it seemed to be after the 100-day mark that this happened? Because, you know, there was so much celebration on the 100th day of Trump's presidency that everything was going great, and all of a sudden this kind of came out of nowhere, Gemma.
I wonder if this has come out after, because if it came out on the 100th day, it would have been overshadowed by these 100th day, you know, the way it's marked in the US, it's a very big deal. I also think it's coming at a time when it's a big distraction for Trump. So I don't think this is going to go down well whatsoever, you know, with Russia and Ukraine, with India and Pakistan. Trump is dealing with so much at the moment. While he publicly has shown support and jokes, you wonder what's being said and thought privately.
These 100 days were not all, you know, rosy in that sense. There have been so many challenges on so many different fronts. And definitely the team is going to pay the price somehow. And maybe this is one of the things that will develop in that sense.
Very interesting. But if we talk about overshadowing, Dr. Ellie, Walt's exit seems to have completely overshadowed today's minerals deal agreement with Ukraine. But this almost seems like a win for Donald Trump.
It is definitely a big win for Donald Trump. This has been his, he has set his eye on it from the beginning. He has clearly said, okay, we want your minerals if you want us to support in your defense. So this is also a new way of doing foreign policy in that sense. But also it's important to note that it was not Waltz who was doing all the negotiation on Russia-Ukraine, but Witkoff. Witkoff, who's supposed to be only a Middle East envoy, he was the one talking to Putin. He was the one to develop the deal, along with, of course, the representative or the special representative to Ukraine alongside. The deal altogether, I think it's going to put a strong vested interest of the U.S. in the stability of Ukraine, and thus, hopefully, it will rebalance or recalibrate the U.S. position in that conflict, whereas we saw in the past month, it was more in favor of Putin, offering Putin almost everything that he wanted, and still Putin did not show positive signs except minor ones. So now hopefully the US is on the way to recalibrate things and play a real role of a real mediator who's really vested in the security and stability of the region.
No, absolutely. And do you think we could see a change? Do you think we could see Steve Witkoff now maybe stepping into those shoes?
It could be. I think he has played a bigger role, yet he has been quite controversial on the way he speaks. He's not a very diplomatic person. He has upset so many persons with his comments about Egypt being a bankrupt country, with his comments with Bibi Netanyahu. Also, there was a little conflict in that, all the discourse he did. So he's not a proper diplomat per se. He doesn't have any political experience before this position. So it's a challenging, but it seems this is the way things are heading. He's been given a much bigger role. So Witkoff could be the next national security advisor with the risks attached to that.
And not having political experience seems to be quite popular at the moment.
Exactly.
Pete Hegseth, just to name one. But thank you so much. That was very interesting. That was just on Mike Waltz there, leaving his role at the White House. But let's move on to another story. And we're staying actually in the US, as overnight former Vice President Kamala Harris criticized the Trump administration in her first major speech since losing the election. Harris specifically called out the handling of the country's economy and immigration policy at an event run by Emerge, an organisation that recruits and trains Democratic women for public office. Let's just take a listen to what she had to say.
We all know President Trump and his administration and their allies are counting on the notion that fear can be contagious. Courage is contagious. The courage of Americans who are banding together in the face of the greatest man-made economic crisis in modern presidential history.
So there we are, Kamala Harris speaking last night. We've barely heard from the Democrats, Gemma, since Trump won the election. So what else did Kamala have to say last night? I know her speech was about 15 minutes long.
She had a lot to say. But I think what was interesting for me, she didn't make any personal remarks or attacks about Trump. And if we recall a couple of weeks ago, Biden didn't mention him by name either. It's almost like they are deliberately not talking about Trump as a person. I don't know if this is the high road that they like to take. But she did, you know, she made some, she used big language. You know, she talked about the greatest man-made economic crisis in modern presidential history. She talked about Trump deliberately sowing fear to consolidate his own executive power. She also said, instead of an administration working to advance America's highest deals, we are witnessing the wholesale abandonment of those ideals. And as we know, in American politics, the idea of America and democracy is so important and so ingrained that that's quite a big attack from my perspective.
I'm wondering if the limitation or the not willing to attack Trump personally, because they tried that in the election and they failed to reach to the public, because the Trump obviously has some attraction to the public or to the voters. So probably that they're trying to avoid personal attacks, trying to play the bigger role into focusing on issues, but still they are avoiding some issues and focusing on others.
I don't think they go as far either, do they? You know, Trump will go all out, but they're still quite reticent. So you don't get that from them.
Very true. And we haven't seen much of the Democrats, as you said. We don't see any clear leadership. We don't see any clear heat put on Trump with his policies, and he's been getting away with a lot.
Oh, and it's quite interesting because I think a lot of people, what the feeling is as the Democrats just seem so divided on how to go about this and where they can actually make a difference, because Trump is just monopolizing the headlines in the US. And I think the Democrats are a little bit, maybe slightly lost at the moment.
Very true. I think they're not only divided on how to face Trump, but they are actually divided on policies. And we've seen in the last election the Democratic Party go a bit too much to the left and then trying to adjust course in the middle of the race, which didn't play out well. Now, the only possible leadership that we have seen, or at least attempt to a leadership, is by Sanders and Cortez, AOC, which are very, very left in that sense and leave out a lot of the spectrum of the Democratic voters in general. So I think they have a serious issue to rethink what party will they present to the people in the upcoming midterm elections. There's not much time to go on that. And again, both speeches did not mention, for example, the issue of immigration, did not mention the issue of LGBT and so on, maybe because they saw that the American public has a clear majority on these issues in favor of what Trump has chosen to adopt.
So I don't know what both of you think, but do you think Kamala Harris last night made this speech because she wants to make a political comeback? This has been a lot of discussion because obviously the presidential campaign didn't go the way they wished. So where can we expect to see her pop up, do you think?
I think irrespective of whether or not she wants to run again, I just don't think it's going to work out. I think it's time to step aside, fresh perspectives, and Americans don't like, I hate to say it, air quotes, losers. And this is what I find interesting. In UK politics, you have one person running the party for years and years, and they could lose election after election after election, but they still are in charge of the party. In America, as soon as you lose an election, you're gone, because they don't seem to like that air of failure. So no, I don't think, and just because she lost the election, I just don't think it'd be possible for her to.
But it's quite interesting because Donald Trump lost the election and then he came back for a second term. So politics is like a funny game.
But he has shown himself to be an exception in so many ways.
Absolutely. That I cannot deny.
And even Trump did not run as a party candidate. He's not the Republican candidate. He's Trump. He brought the Republican, voters to him in that sense. I fully agree with Gemma that I think it's going to be very difficult for Kamala Kamala to return. We've heard talks about her running for governor of California, but that would be practically a step backwards in her career. It might put her on the scene and give her the platform to potentially run for elections in 2028. But I don't see that materializing. The problem is, again, that we don't see other leadership step up in the Democratic Party, and we have to wait to see how that goes. I also think that the Democratic voters did not forgive her yet, and they do blame her for the loss, at least partially, or for not speaking out about Biden's mental situation and so many different things. So she did take a hit in that sense, even within the Democratic Party, so I doubt that she could recover from that. But then politics is politics, and everything could be possible.
Yeah, absolutely. But she didn't have much time, really, Gemma, did she, to prepare for an election?
She had about 3 months to go out there, take over, get her messaging together. And a lot of people, again, Biden does get the blame for that, and I do tend to agree with it, that she just wasn't given enough time. So I don't think we can lay the blame for that firmly at her feet.
But then again, she's a presidential candidate that was not voted as a presidential candidate. She took on the ticket from Biden without even being voted by, you know, the caucuses of the Democratic Party and the normal process of choosing a candidate, because she lost in the primaries.
Yeah. Good point. No, absolutely true. And it's so interesting. I wonder what the Democrats are going to do. We'll have to wait and see.